Welcome to this short video about the difference between call, apply, and bind. And before we discuss the difference between the three of them, we need to understand why they exist in JavaScript. So the idea that they exist because we might require to run a function that uses the this keyword inside it, but we don't know what is the context this function is running in. So we don't know if this function is using this object or rather this object, and we cannot bind to it. Or we are using functional programming for some reason inside our code and we cannot bind to this. Or we would like to force a certain function that is running inside a certain class to use a certain object as its context. So the problems or the bugs that arises from it are quite complex to debug or to try to find, but the purpose of this video is that you understand the differences between the three of them and how they are working. So when you find a bug, whenever it exists using these functions, you would understand them, because it's quite complicated to find these bugs and try to find the reason. So we need to understand that the three functions, they basically run a certain method in a context, and the context could be any object in JavaScript. So what we would like to do in this practical example to try to differentiate between the three of them is that we would have this text field and we have this submit button. Basically, they are just inside an HTML and each one of them have an ID. And we getting each one of them here using the get element by ID. Just use the pure JavaScript. And what we would like to do is that when we enter a certain text and we click on the submit button, we see a console log. And maybe there are other parameters that are passed to the function. So an example to this one, you would usually, I understand, like the example is pretty simple. We would just like, okay, I would just like add an event listener and just listen to it. But bear with me, like we just like use with another way just to understand this example. So we'd have a const and we say on submit clicked, maybe this is just a name of the function, and we have our function here and we open it and we would like to console.log the value of whatever context that is using or being passed to this function. So we'd have our value and we need to also output to other parameters passed to this function. So we have message and also we have type, just any variables, and we are just passing it to these functions. And like we said, when we click on this one, we would like to see what is the value on this one. So we will just like have our on submit button and we have our add event listener. We need to listen on click and we have our function, and maybe also to make it quite hard to see it, so we just like add a set timeout, and this set timeout would be after 100. Maybe even we don't need the set timeout thingy. Okay, so we just like add this one and then pass the function. So the first part is call. And call, we need to take the function. Usually what you would do is just like pass this one and maybe you would have your element and then you would pass it here. But for some reason, you can't do it. Maybe it is using async, maybe the component is not existing. Like there might be multiple reasons for this. And you would need to get like, maybe this is async. Like there are many reasons why they might exist. But just for using the call, instead of just executing the function directly, instead of this, we just click dot call. This would be our first one. And call method would take the context of it. So we would take the input field, pass it here, and then the extra parameters that we need to pass them to the function, message and type, we need to pass each one of them separated. So maybe the message would say hello world, maybe, or yeah, I wrote it in a mistake, it's fine. And maybe the type is post. And that's it. So this is how call works. So if I just like write some text and click submit, now I see the console log. So I see my text, I see the other parameter, hello world, and the post. Apply is exactly the same, but rather than call, we just like replace this one. And the only difference is that the parameters, instead of being passed like this, each one of them separated as its own prop, they are paused as an array. So I just remove it and add an array. And if I run it again, add like extra text. And if I click submit, I see the same command run again. The last one, which is bind, the only difference is that apply and call execute the function directly. Bind returns a method that we need to execute. So we could click here, like instead of this one, and we write here maybe binded to input field. And what we would do is exactly almost the same. We will just like take our function again and we click bind. Maybe I just remove this part or keep it, just comment and bind. And I would like to bind it to something. So I would take input field, and this is the field that I would like to bind to. And now this is a function that already has this object binded to it. So I could directly execute it. I will just take the function and then take my parameters, which is these two. And then I could write this and it would do the exact same thing. Usually the bind wouldn't be inside this one. Sometimes it could be outside as well. And in this case, I keep it binded, what happens inside this one. Like maybe some of the errors, maybe you are using like function and this function is not bind to it and it is causing problems with this. Sometimes it could happen, but with this, using the bind, it would be always bind to our object. So there are multiple reasons that this could happen. So that's the difference between call, apply, and bind. Hopefully you find this video useful. And if you have any questions, just leave them in the comments and I would answer them. And yeah, thanks and see you in the next video. Ciao.